Professor Nam Yong Lee's long commentary. Elon Musk's Starlink satellite empire is conquering the Republic of Korea 1. What is Starlink? Starlink is not just another satellite internet company. Starlink is a planetary-scale project that aims to deploy thousands to tens of thousands of small communication satellites into low Earth orbit, densely enough that as long as you can see the sky from anywhere on Earth, you can connect to the internet. Traditional communications have relied on national telecom operators building base stations and fiber optic cables on land and laying submarine cables under the sea to provide service. Starlink, by contrast, envisions building a vast communications net in the sky and connecting homes, ships and airplanes directly to satellites through small satellite antennas installed on site. Since its first launch in 2019, Starlink has already placed thousands of low Earth orbit satellites into space, to the point where people now say that more than half of all active satellites are Starlink satellites. Its first stage goal is to deploy around 12,000 satellites, and it is architected to expand into the tens of thousands. On the back of this massive satellite constellation, Starlink makes no secret of its ambition to capture 10 to 20% of the global telecommunications market and generate annual revenues in the tens of billions of dollars. 2. Global standard features of Starlink satellites and links. The most important features of Starlink satellites are their location and speed. Conventional broadcast and communication satellites have stayed in geostationary orbit roughly 36,000 kilometers above Earth. At that altitude, the satellite's orbital speed matches Earth's rotation, so it always looks down on the same spot, but it takes about 500 to 700 milliseconds for a signal to make a round trip. The latency is substantial. Starlink, on the other hand, places its satellites in low Earth orbit between about 300 and 1,200 kilometers, with a goal of reducing latency to the range of 20 to 50 milliseconds. This is slightly slower than fiber optic cables, but sufficient for most real-time services such as video conferencing, online gaming, and remote control. To make this possible, Starlink distributes thousands of low-orbit satellites across multiple orbital planes so that several satellites are always passing over any given region. For radio frequencies, Starlink mainly uses high-frequency bands such as Ku and Kai, enabling high-speed data transfers from several hundred megabits to up to 1 gigabit per second. On the ground, satellite dishes or flat-phased array antennas send and receive signals to and from the satellites. Instead of mechanically rotating the dish as in the past, these antennas electronically steer the beam, allowing them to track multiple satellites quickly. Another core element of Starlink is its links, that is, how everything is connected. The first type of link is the uplink and downlink between the ground and the satellites, the structure in which user terminals installed in homes, ships, aircraft and vehicles, as well as ground gateways, send and receive high-frequency signals to and from the satellites. The second type is the inter-satellite link, where satellites exchange data directly with one another. Starlink is designed so that satellites are connected by laser or optical communications, allowing data to move inside the satellite network without going through ground stations. Once this structure is complete, even if a submarine cable carrying data from somewhere on Earth is cut, that data could be rerouted to another continent through space. In effect, a space-based backbone separate from the terrestrial internet backbone would be created. From the perspective of global standards, low Earth orbit satellites, high-frequency bands, electronic phased array antennas, and laser-based inter-satellite links are all becoming the core technological pillars of next-generation satellite communications. Starlink can be seen as a representative model that implements all four of these pillars at once. 3. The global communications architecture is being restructured into 3 layers. International statistics on the global telecommunications market show that mobile phone subscriptions have already surpassed 1 line per 100 people, and there are many countries where mobile broadband subscriptions reach 80 to 90 per 100 people. However, fixed broadband, especially wired internet coverage in rural areas, on islands, and in developing countries, often lingers at around 10 to 20 lines per 100 people. The connectivity gap is severe. It is precisely to fill this gap that low Earth orbit satellite internet has emerged. Today, the world's communications architecture is being reorganized into 3 layers. First, the global backbone formed by submarine cables and intercontinental fiber optic cables. Second, terrestrial mobile networks from 4G to 5G and on to 6G. And third, low Earth orbit satellite constellations such as Starlink. In the past, geostationary satellites mainly carried television broadcasts and some telecommunications backhaul. Now low-orbit satellites are rising as a de facto third broadband layer. The European Union's push for its own satellite network and the emergence of massive potential demand for satellite internet across India, Africa and Latin America all reflect this 3-layer structure. Starlink is a project designed to seize this third layer, the low-orbit satellite broadband layer, and thereby secure a significant share of global communications power. Starlink has reached Korea's doorstep. The Republic of Korea is no exception to this vast trend. Our country already ranks among the world leaders in fixed broadband and mobile broadband penetration, and we are in the leading group in terms of 5G speed and coverage. Yet there are still coverage gaps in mountainous regions, on islands, in remote areas, on fishing and merchant vessels, aboard aircraft, in military operational zones, and in disaster-stricken regions. Starlink is targeting precisely these gaps. Government ministries and agencies have already been conducting tests for radio and equipment conformity for Starlink user terminals, and the approval process for service provision agreements between Starlink Korea and its overseas headquarters has been under discussion as well. Once these procedures are completed, a Starlink antenna and a power connection will be enough to establish satellite internet connectivity in remote mountain villages in Gangwon province, on fishing boats in the East and West Seas, along routes to and from Jeju, at Marine Corps and Navy units, and in areas where terrestrial base stations have been knocked out by wildfires or floods. The fact that Starlink played a major role in keeping communications alive throughout the war in Ukraine, and that satellite internet has already been used as an emergency network during major wildfires and floods in the United States and Australia, suggests that demand to use Starlink in Korean disaster and security situations will inevitably grow. 5. Restructuring the communications relationship. The triangle of citizens, state and corporations is changing. From the standpoint of relational philosophy, the essence of Starlink lies in a restructuring of the communications relationship. Until now, citizens paid their bills to domestic telecom operators. Those operators leased spectrum and numbering resources from the state, and the state in turn imposed universal service and emergency communications obligations on the operators. The system moved within this triangle. Once Starlink enters in earnest, however, citizens will be able to connect to the internet by contracting directly with an overseas private company, bypassing domestic networks. Subscription fees will flow overseas, and domestic telecom companies will lose the corresponding revenue and customer data. At the same time, large grey zones will emerge that do not fit neatly into existing regulatory frameworks for taxation, spectrum usage fees, network investment obligations, emergency alert delivery, priority access for critical communications, lawful interception, and cooperation with criminal investigations. As the Ukraine case has shown, private satellite networks like Starlink have become non-state actors capable of altering the course of a war by providing or cutting off service to specific countries. If the Republic of Korea becomes overly dependent on Starlink for military, disaster response, and administrative communications, our networks could be reduced to bargaining chips in foreign and security negotiations shaped by the state of the US-RoK alliance, US-China tensions, international sanctions, and diplomatic frictions. At the same time, the satellite network could open up a new opportunity to provide external information to North Korean residents and gradually erode the North's closed information control regime at a structural level. How we design this new web of relationships will be directly tied to our unification and security strategy. 6. Challenges for Korea's telecommunications market in light of global standards. Compared with international statistics, Korea's telecommunications sector is a double-edged sword. One edge is our proud strength. In fixed broadband penetration, 5G penetration, and average download speed, Korea consistently ranks among the global leaders. This means our citizens already enjoy world-class communications infrastructure, but it also means that the domestic market is saturated and there is limited room for additional growth by domestic carriers. The other edge is our vulnerability. Globally, several billion people still lack stable access to wired or wireless internet, and global low-orbit satellite providers are fiercely competing over this vast underserved market. Starlink is poised to grow primarily in such emerging markets, while at the same time targeting niche segments in technologically advanced countries like Korea, mountainous regions, islands, maritime and aviation sectors, disaster response and defense. In this process, domestic operators may face greater pressure in areas where they must continue service for policy reasons, even though profitability is low. Domestic manufacturers that produce equipment, components and terminals may be exposed to the risk of being locked into particular satellite terminal specifications. Conversely, if Korea secures its own technologies and standards in areas such as low Earth orbit satellites, integrated antennas, and communications modules for vehicles, drones, and ships, and participates actively in global standards competition, new industrial opportunities could open up. Korea's telecommunications and industrial policy must recognize and respond to both sides of this reality. 7. Beyond regulation, we must architect our information and communications sovereignty. What matters now is no longer a simple regulatory debate over whether to allow or block Starlink. The real issue is how to architect the Republic of Korea's information and communication sovereignty. In the United States, the federal enterprise architecture does not treat telecommunications and networks as mere infrastructure. They are managed as part of the core national mission. Korea likewise must redefine information and communications as a core national mission at the intersection of constitutional rights, national security, industrial policy, and digital sovereignty. First, we need an information and communication sovereignty framework that integrates data sovereignty, net neutrality, satellite orbit and spectrum usage rights, priority access for communications in emergencies, and authority over security-related communications. Second, we need a ground space integrated network architecture that draws 6G submarine cables and low, medium and geostationary orbit satellites into a single design. We must decide in advance which layers will be led by domestic companies, which will be jointly operated with allies and partner firms, and which will be kept separate as security-only networks, independent of commercial systems. Third, we must build multi-route communications networks in the public sector first. Even when terrestrial networks are crippled, satellite, military and international networks must be able to back each other up to provide uninterrupted service. In this process, foreign private networks, such as Starlink, should be treated as both a threat and an option, and our laws and regulations should be revised so that they can be leveraged accordingly. Regulation must be a means of implementing this architecture, not an end in itself. 8. Conclusion. The navigation chart. Korea must draw in Musk's net Starlink is not just a bundle of satellites, it is a vast digital net that simultaneously shakes the world's communications, security, economy, and politics. By bundling together low-orbit communications satellites, high-frequency spectrum, phased array antennas, and laser links, all of which are emerging as global standard technologies, Starlink aims to launch a third layer of communications into space that stands shoulder to shoulder with terrestrial networks. The reason Musk's plan is frightening is not simply the number of satellites. It is that the Republic of Korea has yet to weave communications, data, space, and security into a single integrated strategy. The question Korea must now ask itself is clear. Will we become a small fish caught helplessly in this enormous net? Or will we coolly read global standards and international statistics and become an active navigator who draws our own chart through a unified architecture? In an age when Musk is putting tens of thousands of Starlink satellites into the sky, what Korea must protect is not a difference of a few thousand won in monthly bills, but our information and communications sovereignty and the long-term viability of our national system. Thank you for watching.